The sound came first. Soft, fragile, almost imagined. Daddy. Sarah Whitmore froze in the doorway of the care room, her breath locking painfully in her chest, as if the air itself had betrayed her. The leather strap of her handbag slipped from her fingers and struck the marble floor, but she barely heard it. Her eyes were fixed on the scene before her, a scene that should not exist, a moment every specialist had sworn was impossible. On the woven rug sat her 5-year-old twin daughters Emma and Lily children, who had never spoken a word in their lives. And kneeling in front of them, arms, open head bowed slightly as if afraid to break the moment, was the janitor. His name was Jack Miller, though Sarah had never bothered to remember it. To her, he had always been background noise, another uniform moving through the vast house, another presence designed to be invisible. Yet now his voice trembled as he whispered encouragement, and the sound came again, clearer this time, stronger. Daddy. The word did not belong to him, and yet it was directed at him. In that instant, the world Sarah had constructed with money, discipline, and certainty cracked straight down the center. For 5 years, silence had defined her motherhood. Emma and Lily were born into stillness, their bodies fragile, their diagnoses brutal. Severe neurological damage. No speech development, no voluntary movement beyond reflex. The doctors in Chicago had been confident, almost kind in their finality. They told her not to hope too much, not to torture herself with what could never be. Sarah listened. She always listened to experts. It was how she survived after her husband Michael died in a plane crash when the twins were barely 3 months old. Grief had taught her one lesson above all others. Control was safety, so she controlled everything. Therapy schedules down to the minute. Caregivers trained to precision. A house that ran like a hospital wing, disguised as luxury. The walls were flawless, the routines exact. And yet the rooms echoed with a quiet that pressed against her ears at night, a silence that felt heavier than grief because it never changed. Emma and Lily did not cry. They did not laugh. They existed, and Sarah loved them fiercely from a careful distance, because loving too closely meant risking loss again. Jack Miller arrived 3 weeks earlier, hired through a facilities company. 38 years old. Quiet. Reliable. He wore his uniform like armor-faded gray fabric that marked him as someone to look past. Sarah remembered seeing him once near the nursery, humming under his breath while mopping the floor. She had almost reprimanded him for the noise, then thought better of it. Noise was harmless. Hope was not. She did not know that Jack spoke to the girls every morning, that he knelt beside their chairs and told them about the weather, the clouds over the lake, the sound of birds they could not see. He never asked them to respond. He never waited for proof. Now he did not know Sarah was watching. His eyes were gentle, focused entirely on the twins, as if the rest of the world had dissolved. He coaxed softly, telling them they were safe, that it was all right. When Emma's lips moved again, shaping a sound that trembled, but held Jack's shoulders, sagged with something like awe. Lily followed her breath, hitching as if the word had been locked inside her for years, waiting for the right key. Sarah's heart pounded so violently, she feared it would shatter her ribs. The janitor was being called father. Her daughters were speaking, and none of it made sense. She stepped back before anyone could see her. The door closed with a whisper, but the word followed her down the long hallway, clinging to her thoughts like a ghost that refused to rest. Daddy. It was not jealousy that burned in her chest, not anger. It was something far more frightening. Doubt. She entered her office and sat at the heavy oak desk, where she signed contracts worth millions without hesitation. Yet her hands shook now, as they rested on the polished surface. The medical reports were still there, stacked neatly in a drawer. 5 years of certainty reduced to a single sound she could not unhear. Sarah told herself it had to be coincidence. A random vocalization. Children made noises. She had read that somewhere, but the image would not leave her mind. The way Emma's eyes had lit up. The way Lily had leaned forward, intent present. She had spent a fortune trying to wake that presence, flying specialists in from across the country, installing machines, approving experimental therapies. None of it had produced more than a twitch. And yet, a man paid to clean her floors had knelt down and without instruments or credentials opened something sealed shut. When Sarah finally rose and walked to the window overlooking the garden, and the late afternoon light cast long shadows across unused swings and pristine grass untouched by children's feet, the estate was perfect, and it was dead. A realization settled over her, slow and unwelcome. Whatever had just happened in that room was not an accident. It was not a miracle in the way people use the word lightly. It was a crack in the story she had told herself for years, the story where money could replace presence and control, could replace courage. Down the hall, Jack tucked a blanket around the twins as they drifted into sleep, unaware that the woman who owned the house was standing still, staring at a future she could no longer predict. For the first time since Michael's death, Sarah felt something other than grief pressing against her ribs. Fear, yes. But beneath it, faint and dangerous, was hope. And hope, she knew, was the one thing she had never allowed herself to feel. Sarah Whitmore did not sleep that night. She lay in the darkness of her bedroom, eyes open, staring at the ceiling as if it might offer an explanation the way medical charts once had. Every sound in the house felt amplified, the distant hum of the heating system and the soft creak of wood, settling the faint rustle of trees outside the tall windows. But beneath all of it, threading through her thoughts with relentless precision, was a single word. Daddy. It replayed not as a sound, but as a fracture, a thin line splitting everything she believed she understood about her children, about herself, about control. For 5 years, Sarah had trained herself not to listen too closely to hope. Hope was reckless. Hope had not saved Michael when the plane went down over the Rockies. Hope had not rewired damaged neurons or forced silence to loosen its grip on Emma and Lily. So she had learned to replace it with structure. If grief was chaos, then order was survival. She built her life accordingly, and tonight that life was unraveling because of a man who cleaned hallways and sang to children who, according to every expert, could not hear him in the way it mattered. At dawn, pale light crept across the room, and Sarah rose without feeling rested. She dressed with mechanical precision, a tailored blouse, dark slacks hair, pulled back tightly, the uniform of a woman who did not falter. By the time she reached the dining room, a cup of coffee sat untouched in front of her, already cooling. Staff moved quietly around her, sensing something unsettled in the air. When Jack Miller entered, carrying a tray of clean linens, Sarah felt it immediately, a tightening in her chest that had nothing to do with anger. He greeted her politely, voice low, eyes respectful. And for a moment, she saw him as she always had. A man meant to pass through rooms without leaving a trace. But now she noticed details she had overlooked. The way he stood steady as if braced against something invisible. The calm in his gaze, not timid, not ambitious, simply present. Sarah gestured toward the chair across from her, then hesitated. Power dynamics were fragile things, and she was not ready to dismantle them yet. I saw what happened yesterday, she said finally. Her voice was controlled, but it wavered at the edges. I heard them speak. Jack did not deny it. he did not look triumphant. His eyes softened, and that alone unsettled her more than any argument might have. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "They did. They called you Daddy." The words tasted strange in her mouth, heavy and sharp all at once. "How did you make them do that?" Jack lowered his gaze briefly, then looked back up, meeting her eyes without challenge. "I didn't make them do anything. I just talked to them. I listened. I stayed." Sarah leaned forward, fingers tightening around the porcelain cup. "I have spent years and millions of dollars on specialists," she said, "doctors who train their entire lives. You expect me to believe that all it took was talking?" Jack's answer was quiet, but it landed with unexpected force. Sometimes children don't need to be fixed. They need to feel safe enough to try. The word safe echoed in her mind, colliding with memories she had buried beneath efficiency and schedules. Safe was not a concept she associated with healing. Safety was what came after healing, not before. She straightened the familiar edge of authority, returning to her voice. "You were hired to clean," she said. "From now on, you do nothing with my children without my permission." Jack nodded. No protest. No resentment. He gathered his things and left, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the one that had defined her house for years. Later that morning, Sarah stood outside the care room, watching through a crack in the door. Emma and Lily lay resting, their breathing even. Jack sat nearby, writing in a small notebook, humming softly under his breath. There was no performance in it, no audience. His movements were careful, almost reverent, as if the space itself mattered. Sarah felt something tighten behind her eyes, a sensation dangerously close to tears. And she turned away before it could surface. She retreated to her office, but work would not hold her attention. Contracts blurred together. Numbers lost meaning. Eventually, she opened the digital medical files she knew by heart and read them again, the clinical language cold and absolute. Severe impairment, nonverbal. Poor prognosis. For years, those words had been her shield. Yesterday, they had cracked. Today, they felt brittle. In the afternoon, Sarah asked the nurse to bring the twins into the playroom. She wanted proof, or its absence, something definitive. She greeted them softly, touched their hands, spoke their names. They did not respond. The familiar ache bloomed in her chest, sharp and immediate. When she asked for Jack to be brought in, she told herself it was an experiment, nothing more. The change was immediate. Emma's fingers twitched. Lily's head turned. Jack knelt between them and hummed the same simple melody from the day before, not a song Sarah recognized, just a pattern of sound that rose and fell like breathing. The twins' eyes followed him, alert, engaged. A faint smile flickered across Lily's face, brief but undeniable. Sarah's breath caught. She felt exposed, as if something private had been revealed against her will. Jack glanced up at her, then his expression calm, almost apologetic. "They can respond," he said gently. "It just takes time. And patience." For the first time since she became a mother, Sarah did not know what to say. She nodded once sharply and left the room, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and something dangerously close to awe. In her office that evening, she stared out at the darkened garden and asked herself a question she had avoided for years. What if the problem was not that her children could not reach the world, but that she had never truly reached them? As night fell, Sarah remained alone, the house quiet around her, her certainty eroding piece by piece. She had believed power meant control, that love expressed through protection and provision was enough. Now a janitor with no credentials had stepped into her carefully ordered world, and without trying to overthrow it, had exposed its emptiness. She did not yet know who Jack Miller truly was, or why her daughters responded to him as they did. But she knew one thing with unsettling clarity. Whatever came next would demand something she had not given in years: presence. The next morning arrived, wrapped in a gray stillness that seemed to press down on the house from every direction. A low mist clung to the lake beyond the windows, blurring the horizon until water and sky became indistinguishable. Sarah Whitmore stood in the hallway outside the care room, her hand hovering inches from the door, listening. She did not know what she expected to hear. A voice, a sound, proof that yesterday had been real. Instead, there was only the quiet rhythm of breathing, and beneath it, something softer. Singing. Her body reacted before her mind did. The melody slipped under her skin, familiar in a way that made her chest tighten sharply. It was not a lullaby she recognized from any book or playlist. It was slower, simpler, a tune shaped by memory rather than music. Sarah pushed the door open just enough to see inside. Jack Miller sat cross-legged on the rug, his back straight, his hands moving gently as he rubbed lotion into Emma's arms. Lily lay beside him, eyes half closed, her fingers curling and uncurling, as if following the rhythm of the sound. The curtains were drawn wide, letting the pale morning light wash over the room. For a moment, Sarah could not move. The song was not just familiar. It was impossible. Michael used to hum that melody when she was pregnant. Late at night, when sleep would not come, he would stand in the nursery they were preparing and hum softly, as if the babies inside her could already hear. He never sang the same tune twice, except for that one. The one, he said, felt right. Sarah had not heard it since the night before he left for his final flight. "Where did you learn that song?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack turned, startled but composed. He did not stop singing right away, easing the melody to a close before answering. "I didn't know you were there," he said quietly. Then he glanced down at the floor beside him and reached for a small, worn notebook. Its edges were frayed, the cover creased from years of handling. "I found this behind one of the cabinets," he continued. "I thought it belonged to your husband." Sarah crossed the room on unsteady legs and took the notebook from his hands. She recognized Michael's handwriting instantly, the slight slant, the careful loops. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside were notes on feeding schedules, reminders about bedtime routines, and near the center, a short list labeled lullabies. The last entry read, "For when I am not here anymore." The room seemed to tilt. Sarah sank to her knees, clutching the notebook to her chest as a sharp, aching pain spread through her ribs. She had not known this existed, had never looked for it. In her effort to survive, she had sealed away anything that might reopen the wound of losing him. And in doing so, she had sealed away this too. "You didn't overstep," she said, her voice breaking. "You did what I couldn't." Jack shook his head gently. "They love the song," he said. "Every time I sing it, they try to move their mouths, like they remember something." Sarah looked at Emma and Lily. Their eyes were open now, watching her with a focus she had rarely seen. She reached out and touched Emma's hand. The little girl did not pull away. Instead, she turned her head slightly toward her mother, her lips parting as if testing the air. A faint sound escaped, barely more than breath. Sarah froze. Was that? She could not finish the sentence. "She's trying," Jack said softly. "She's been practicing." For a long moment, no one spoke. The house felt different, as if something long dormant had stirred awake. Sarah stood slowly, her thoughts racing. The doctors had told her there was no hope. She had believed them because believing them had been easier than living in constant uncertainty. Now hope was standing in front of her, fragile and undeniable, and she had no idea how to hold it. That afternoon, Sarah could not bring herself to leave the care room. She lingered in the hallway listening as Jack read picture books, his voice patient, unhurried. After each sentence, he paused, waiting not for a response, but for permission. "It's okay," he would murmur. "You can take your time." The word struck her with unexpected force. Take your time. She had never given her children that. Every therapy session had been a race against decline, every milestone a demand. She pressed her back against the wall, arms folded not in defense, but in containment, trying to hold herself together as realization settled in. Jack was not cleaning her house. He was healing something that had broken the day Michael died. That evening, alone in her office, Sarah opened the notebook again. She read every line slowly, as if each word were Michael speaking directly to her. Near the end, she found a passage that stole her breath. "If anything ever happens to me, remind the girls that love can still reach them even when words cannot." Tears blurred her vision. She had tried to heal with money and control, believing that was all she had left to offer. Michael had understood something she had been too afraid to face. Love was not something you managed. It was something you risked. The next morning, Sarah made a decision that would have terrified the woman she had been a week earlier. She called the staffing agency and requested Jack Miller's complete file. Every job, every reference, every reason for leaving. When the document arrived, she read it with a growing sense of unease. Maintenance positions at pediatric hospitals, volunteer work with disabled children, and then a line that made her chest tighten painfully. Family status, single father, one daughter. She opened the attached medical summary. Mia Miller, 6 years old, diagnosed with quadriplegic cerebral palsy, nonverbal, limited mobility. Sarah closed the laptop slowly. The truth settled over her with quiet clarity. Jack did not possess a secret technique. He possessed experience forged in daily struggle patience, learned not in classrooms, but in hospital rooms and sleepless nights. He understood her daughters not as cases, but as children because he lived that reality every day with his own. That afternoon, Sarah drove to the address listed in the file, telling herself she would not intrude, that she would turn back if she felt it was wrong. She parked across the street from a modest apartment building in a working-class neighborhood and waited. When Jack appeared on the balcony, pushing a wheelchair with a small girl inside, Sarah's breath caught. Mia's smile was crooked, but radiant, her joy unmistakable. Jack knelt, pointing out birds in the sky, singing softly. Mia tried to mimic him, soundless but intent. Tears slid down Sarah's cheeks. She understood now. Jack's power did not come from authority or expertise. It came from refusal. He refused to give up. He refused to look away from pain. He refused to believe silence meant absence. As she drove home, her phone buzzed with a message from the nurse. Lily had made a new sound, on her own. Sarah's heart leapt. Whatever was unfolding was no longer contained within one room or one man. It was moving, growing, demanding that she change with it. And for the first time in 5 years, Sarah Whitmore did not push that demand away. The storm did not arrive suddenly. It pressed itself slowly against the house, thickening the air, darkening the sky, making every room feel smaller. Sarah Whitmore sensed it long before the forecast confirmed it. She saw it in the restless way Emma and Lily shifted in their cribs that afternoon, their eyes drifting repeatedly toward the doorway, their bodies tense as if anticipating something unseen. The house, once controlled and predictable, felt alert waiting. Jack noticed it immediately. He knelt beside the twins, his movements slower than usual, his voice lowered. He explained calmly that some children were sensitive to pressure changes, to distant vibrations in the air. Sarah listened closely, not as an employer evaluating staff, but as a mother trying to learn her children for the first time. This was not medical language. It was lived knowledge, the kind earned through years of watching, adjusting, staying. By late afternoon, the sky over Lakeview Heights had turned the color of bruised steel. Wind swept across the water in sharp gusts, bending trees and rattling branches against the windows. Sarah stood in her office, arms crossed, staring out at the garden, as if she could hold the storm back by will alone. She checked the time. Jack usually left at 5. Today, the thought of him staying felt wrong. She found him in the laundry room, folding towels with quiet precision. She told him he should leave early, that the roads would be dangerous, that his daughter needed him. Jack hesitated, glancing instinctively toward the stairs leading to the care room. He said the girls were unsettled, that he did not like leaving them when they felt like this. Sarah surprised herself by answering without hesitation. She told him she would stay. She told him to go home. Jack nodded slowly, gratitude and concern mixing in his eyes. He reminded her to call if she needed anything at any hour. When he left, the first heavy drops of rain struck the windows loud and sudden, as if the sky had finally decided to release what it had been holding back. Sarah watched him drive away, unaware that she was about to face the true test of everything she had learned in the past days. Upstairs, the nurse prepared for the night shift, placing flashlights and candles within reach. The twins lay awake, eyes wide, bodies rigid with unease. Sarah pulled a chair between their cribs and sat down, placing one hand on Emma's arm and the other on Lily's. She told them she was there, that she was not going anywhere, repeating the words as much for herself as for them. The storm answered her with a distant roll of thunder. When the power went out, it happened all at once. The lights flickered briefly, then vanished, plunging the room into darkness, broken only by the narrow beam of a flashlight. Wind howled outside like something alive, throwing rain against the glass with violent insistence. Thunder cracked overhead, close enough to make the walls tremble. And then the crying began. It was not the soft fussing Sarah was accustomed to. It was fear, raw and uncontrollable. Emma's face twisted as Sarah lifted her from the crib, her small body shaking, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Lily cried too, her sound higher, thinner, threaded with panic. Sarah held them, rocking gently, whispering reassurances she hoped they could feel, even if they could not fully understand. She tried to sing. She reached for the lullaby Michael used to hum the melody that had returned to the house through Jack. But her voice fractured as soon as it left her throat. The storm swallowed it whole, thunder rolling again, closer this time. The girls did not calm. Their fear escalated, and Sarah felt helplessness rise in her chest, sharp and suffocating. Then Emma made a sound that cut through everything. Jack. It was imperfect, breathy, but unmistakable. Sarah froze. Lily followed moments later, her voice weaker but just as clear. Jack. The name echoed in the dark room like a truth Sarah could no longer avoid. In their terror, her daughters were reaching for the person who had taught them that sound could bring comfort, that presence meant safety. Sarah felt no jealousy, no anger, only clarity. She laid Emma back into her crib with trembling hands and turned to the nurse, asking her to stay with the girls and keep them calm. Her voice did not shake when she said she would be right back. She ran downstairs through the darkened house, the storm roaring around her, and dialed Jack's number without thinking. The line connected after 2 rings, wind and rain loud in the background. Sarah told him the girls were calling for him, that they were terrified that she did not know what else to do. There was a brief silence. Then Jack's voice came through, steady and sure. He told her to put the phone near them to let him talk. She rushed back upstairs and placed the phone between the cribs, turning on the speaker. Jack's voice filled the room, low and familiar, cutting through the chaos with quiet authority. He spoke their names, told them they were safe, reminded them that their mother was there and that the storm would pass. Then he began to sing. The sound was distorted by the phone, thin and imperfect, but the melody was unmistakable. Emma's crying slowed, first her breathing evening out. Lily followed her small body, relaxing as the tension drained away. Within minutes, both girls were asleep, and their faces peaceful despite the storm still raging outside. Sarah sank down onto the floor between the cribs, tears streaming down her face. She listened to Jack sing through the speaker, and something inside her shifted permanently. She understood now that love was not defined by blood or titles. It was defined by who showed up when fear was loudest. When the song ended and Jack confirmed that he and his daughter were safe at home, Sarah whispered her thanks, her voice thick with emotion. After the call ended, Sarah remained there in the darkness, holding one small hand in each of hers. The storm continued outside, but inside the room, something had finally settled. For the first time in 5 years, Sarah Whitmore was not managing motherhood. She was living it. Morning arrived quietly, as if the storm had drained the house of its anger and left only exhaustion behind. Pale sunlight slipped through the curtains of the care room, touching the walls with a softness Sarah Whitmore had not felt in years. She woke on the floor between the cribs, her neck stiff, her body sore, but her heart strangely light. For the first time since Emma and Lily were born, she had not slept out of duty or collapse. She had slept because she chose to stay. The twins were still asleep, their breathing slow, and even their faces relaxed in a way Sarah had rarely seen. She rose carefully, smoothing their blankets, then stepped into the hallway, where the hum of restored electricity whispered through the vents. In the kitchen, she poured herself coffee she barely tasted, and stood by the window, watching broken branches scattered across the lawn. The storm had left scars, but it had also cleared the sky. Sunlight now broke through thinning clouds, bright and honest. At 8 o'clock, the back door opened. Sarah turned as Jack Miller stepped inside his uniform, faintly marked with streaks of dried rain, his expression cautious. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Something unspoken passed between them, an understanding forged in darkness and fear. Sarah asked if he was all right, if his daughter was safe. Jack nodded relief, flickering in his eyes, as he said that Mia had slept through most of the storm and smiled when she woke. Sarah stepped closer, her voice unsteady but sincere. She told him that the girls had spoken again, that they had formed his name clearly in the dark. Jack's eyes widened, and for a brief second the composure he carried like a shield slipped. He did not celebrate. He bowed his head slightly, as if receiving something fragile. He said they were brave, that fear sometimes unlocked what silence guarded. They went upstairs together. Emma and Lily stirred when Jack entered, their eyes drifting toward him with recognition that no longer felt accidental. Sarah watched from a few steps back as Jack knelt beside the cribs, speaking softly, not demanding anything. The girls responded with small movements, tiny sounds that hovered between breath and intention. Sarah felt something tighten and then release inside her chest. This was not coincidence. This was connection. Later that morning, Sarah sat alone in her office with the door closed. The notebook Michael had left lay open on her desk, its pages worn, its words suddenly alive. She read them again slowly, letting each sentence settle. For years she had believed she was honoring her husband by being strong, by not falling apart. Now she realized she had mistaken distance for strength. Michael had never wanted that. He had wanted presence even when it hurt. Her thoughts turned inevitably to Jack, to the calm authority in his voice during the storm, to the way her daughters had reached for him instinctively, and to the ache that followed, sharp and uncomfortable. Not jealousy, guilt. She had been in the house for 5 years, yet absent in the only way that mattered. Jack had been there for weeks, and he had seen them. By midday, the question she had been avoiding pressed too heavily to ignore. Who was Jack Miller, really? Not as an employee, but as a man. Sarah opened her laptop and pulled up the file she had already reviewed once, and then read it again with different eyes. She lingered on the line about his daughter, the clinical description of Mia's condition, so similar to Emma and Lily's diagnoses, it felt deliberate. Understanding settled over her, slow and undeniable. That afternoon, Sarah found herself driving without fully deciding to. She followed the address listed in the file to a modest building in a neighborhood far removed from gated estates and manicured lawns. She parked across the street and waited, unsure what she was looking for, unsure if she even had the right to be there. When Jack appeared on the small balcony, pushing Mia's wheelchair into the sunlight, Sarah's breath caught. Mia's smile was uneven, imperfect, and utterly radiant. Jack crouched beside her, pointing out birds in the sky, speaking with the same patient warmth he used with Emma and Lily. He sang softly, and Mia tried to follow, her lips moving with effort and determination. Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks, without resistance. This was not charity. This was devotion forged in repetition, in sleepless nights and quiet perseverance. She left before Jack noticed her, her chest aching with a mixture of admiration and shame. On the drive back, her phone buzzed with a message from the nurse. Lily had made another sound, this time without Jack present. It was small, imperfect, but intentional. Sarah pulled over, pressing her forehead against the steering wheel as a sob escaped her. The change had begun to root itself. It no longer depended on a single presence. It was growing. That evening, Sarah stayed with the twins, through dinner, through bedtime, through the slow settling of the house. She spoke to them more than she ever had, narrating simple things, describing the colors of the room, the feeling of fabric beneath her fingers. She did not wait for responses. She simply stayed. When she sang Michael's lullaby, her voice wavered, but she did not stop. Emma's fingers twitched. Lily turned her head slightly. It was enough. As night deepened, Sarah understood that something irreversible had occurred. She could not return to the way things had been. The illusion of control had shattered, replaced by something far more demanding. To love fully meant to risk pain. To be present meant to surrender the safety of distance. Jack Miller had not come into her life to save her children alone. He had come to expose the quiet absence that had ruled her home. Lying on the floor between the cribs once more, Sarah stared at the ceiling and whispered into the dimness, not in prayer, but in honesty. She admitted her fear. She admitted her failures. And for the first time, she admitted her hope. Whatever lay ahead would not be clean or controlled, but it would be real. And she was finally ready to meet it. The days that followed unfolded with a quiet intensity, as if the house itself was learning how to breathe again. Sarah Whitmore moved through her mornings differently now. She lingered in the care room instead of passing it by. She spoke to Emma and Lily, while the nurses adjusted equipment, while sunlight shifted across the walls, while nothing remarkable appeared to be happening. She no longer spoke with expectation. She spoke with presence and that alone changed the weight of the silence. Jack noticed the shift before anyone else did. He did not comment on it, but he slowed his movements when Sarah was near, giving her space without withdrawing. When she knelt beside the cribs, he stepped back instinctively, not out of submission, but out of respect. Sarah felt that difference keenly. Jack never tried to replace her. He created room for her to step into what she had been afraid to claim. Emma and Lily responded in subtle ways. Their eyes followed Sarah more often now. Their hands, once slack and distant, curled faintly around her fingers when she touched them. Small sounds escaped their throats, not words, not yet, but deliberate attempts. Each sound struck Sarah like a quiet revelation. She found herself holding her breath, not wanting to frighten the moment away, with too much hope. One afternoon, as Jack wiped down the counters in the adjoining room, Sarah spoke without turning to face him. She asked how long Mia had been nonverbal. Jack answered calmly, telling her about hospital rooms, about therapies that came and went, about professionals who meant well, but never stayed long enough to truly know his daughter. He spoke without bitterness, but Sarah heard the weight beneath his words. Experience had shaped him into something unbreakable and deeply gentle. He told her that Mia did not speak, but she listened. That she recognized voices, moods, shifts in energy. That children like her, like Emma and Lily, lived in a world where sound mattered less than consistency. Sarah absorbed every word. It struck her that no one had ever explained her own children to her this way, not as diagnoses, but as people. That night, Sarah opened Michael's notebook again. She read the pages, not as instructions, but as fragments of a man who had believed in connection above certainty. One passage stood out with new clarity. Love is repetition. Love is staying when nothing changes. She closed the notebook slowly, pressing her palm against the cover, as if anchoring herself to the truth she had avoided for years. The following morning, Sarah made a decision that would have seemed unthinkable to her former self. She canceled a series of meetings and cleared her schedule completely. When her assistant questioned the urgency of certain calls, Sarah simply said they could wait. For the first time in her career, she allowed something else to take precedence. She sat on the floor of the care room for hours, reading Singing, existing beside her daughters without agenda. Jack watched from a distance, pretending to work while carefully observing. He saw Sarah falter, saw her voice shake when Emma did not respond, saw her continue anyway. He recognized the effort behind the stillness, the courage it took to remain present without guarantees. Slowly, something shifted in the way he looked at her. She was no longer just the woman who owned the house. She was a mother, learning how to stay. Late that afternoon, the nurse called Sarah over her voice, hushed with awe. Lily had turned her head toward Emma and released a sound soft but intentional, as if reaching across an invisible space. Sarah knelt, tears streaming freely now, and whispered encouragement. Jack stood behind her, silent, his hands clenched loosely at his sides. He had seen this before. He knew what it meant. A door had opened, and it would not close again. That evening, Sarah found herself thinking about Jack, not as an employee, but as a presence her children relied on. The realization unsettled her, not because she feared losing authority, but because she feared losing him. She wondered what would happen if Jack left, if the fragile progress they had made would fracture under absence. The thought sat heavily in her chest, demanding to be acknowledged. She asked him to stay late that night, not to work, but to talk. They sat at opposite ends of the long dining table, the house quiet around them. Sarah spoke honestly, admitting her fear, her guilt, her confusion. She told him she felt as though she had arrived late to her own children's lives. Jack listened without interruption, his gaze steady, his posture open. When she finished, he did not rush to reassure her. He told her something that surprised her. He said she had never been absent. She had been afraid. And fear, he explained gently, often wore the disguise of control. He told her that love did not require perfection. It required return. Every time she chose to come back to sit down to try again, she was teaching her daughters something no therapy ever could. The words settled into Sarah with quiet force. For the first time, she did not feel judged. She felt seen. In that moment, she realized something profound. Jack Miller had been underestimated his entire life, dismissed as ordinary, overlooked because of his job, his quiet nature, his lack of visible power. And yet, the truest authority in the room belonged to him, forged not by status, but by endurance. When Sarah returned to the care room that night, she did not leave. She lay between the cribs, one hand resting near Emma, the other near Lily. She sang softly, repeating the lullaby until the melody steadied. As exhaustion pulled her toward sleep, she understood that healing was not an event. It was a choice made again and again, often in silence, often without witnesses. And somewhere in the house, Jack cleaned quietly, unaware that the woman who once believed money could fix everything was finally learning the strength of staying. The idea came to Sarah Whitmore slowly, not as a sudden decision, but as an inevitability she could no longer ignore. It surfaced in quiet moments when she watched Emma and Lily turn their eyes toward Jack before anyone else, when she heard the subtle change in their breathing when his voice entered the room. It appeared when she imagined the house without him, the space reverting to its old sterile silence. The thought unsettled her, not because she feared dependence, but because she finally understood how fragile progress truly was. On the afternoon, she decided to speak. The air outside was thick and heavy clouds, hanging low over the lake, as if threatening another storm. Sarah stood in her office for a long time, staring at the reflection of herself in the window. The woman looking back was still composed, still powerful, but something in her eyes had softened. She was no longer hiding behind certainty. She was preparing to risk something. She found Jack in the laundry room sorting supplies with his usual quiet focus. When she called his name, he turned immediately attentive, but guarded. Sarah asked him to sit with her in the kitchen. This time he did not hesitate. He sat across from her at the long table, his hands folded, his posture steady, unaware that his life was about to shift. Sarah spoke carefully at first. She thanked him again, not just for helping Emma and Lily find their voices, but for reminding her what it meant to truly see her children. Jack tried to deflect the praise, insisting he was only doing his job. But Sarah stopped him. She told him she had seen how he lived with his daughter, how he carried patience like a second skin. She told him she understood now that what he offered could not be bought or replicated. Then she said the words that made his breath catch. She asked him to consider moving into the estate with his daughter, not as staff housing, not as a favor, but as a shared arrangement, one rooted in mutual care. She explained there was an unused wing of the house, fully equipped private, close to medical support. She offered to double his salary, then quickly clarified that money was not the point. The point was stability. For her children. For his. Jack stared at her in stunned silence. He did not answer right away. His eyes dropped to the table, his jaw tightening as if he were holding back something too heavy to surface all at once. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. He told her he could not accept that kind of money. He said he did not want to feel like he was being paid to become part of someone's life. If this was to happen, it had to be real. Sarah felt her throat tighten. She told him she understood. She told him she did not want charity or control. She wanted honesty. She wanted family, even if the word still felt fragile on her tongue. Jack asked for time. He said he needed to talk to his daughter to make sure this was right for her. Sarah agreed without hesitation. She told him there was no rush. The days that followed stretched with quiet anticipation. Sarah did not press him. She did not mention the offer again. She watched instead, noticing how Jack's gaze lingered on the west wing as he passed it, how his expression grew thoughtful when Emma and Lily responded to him with new sounds, new movements. She saw the weight of the decision settling on him, and she respected it. On the morning Jack came to her office, Sarah sensed the answer before he spoke. He asked to sit, and this time there was no distance in his posture. He told her about the conversation with his daughter, about how he had explained Emma and Lily's condition in simple terms. He said his daughter had listened quietly, then asked one question that had shattered him. "Are they like me?" Sarah covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes as Jack continued. He told her his daughter had never had a real friend, never met another child who understood her world without explanation. When she asked if she could play with the twins, something inside him had broken open. He told Sarah that if the offer still stood, they would accept, but with one condition. He would take only his current salary and the housing. Nothing more. Sarah stood and walked around the desk, stopping in front of him. She did not speak at first. Instead, she did something she had not done in years. She embraced him, not as an employer, not as a benefactor, but as someone who recognized another wounded soul. She told him he was welcome, that they would do this together as a family. A week later, the car pulled into the long driveway under a clear afternoon sky. Sarah stood at the entrance as Jack carefully lifted his daughter's wheelchair from the trunk. The little girl looked up at the vast house with wide, curious eyes. Sarah knelt in front of her, introducing herself, gently telling her how happy she was that she had come. Inside, Emma and Lily waited, their faces lit with anticipation. As they crossed the threshold together, Sarah felt the house change, not in its walls or its grandeur, but in its purpose. For the first time in 5 years, it was no longer a monument to loss. It was becoming something alive. And as Jack wheeled his daughter inside, underestimated no longer, Sarah understood that true power had entered her home quietly, wearing a faded uniform and carrying a heart strong enough to hold them all. Morning light filled the east wing, slowly, not rushing, not demanding attention, as if it understood that this house now moved at a different pace. Sarah Whitmore stood in the doorway of the care room, watching Emma and Lily sleep, while Mia rested nearby, her wheelchair positioned close enough that the girls could see her when they woke. For the first time since becoming a mother, Sarah felt no urgency to direct the moment. She simply observed, allowing stillness to exist without fear. When the girls opened their eyes, there was no panic. Emma turned her head slightly toward Mia, curiosity softening her expression. Lily released a faint sound, not a word, but a deliberate attempt, and Mia responded with a crooked smile that lit her entire face. Sarah felt her breath catch. This was not progress measured by charts or milestones. This was connection unfolding naturally, without instruction, without pressure. Jack entered quietly, carrying a cup of coffee for Sarah and one for himself. He did not announce his presence. He never did. He knelt beside the children, speaking softly, his voice grounding the room. Sarah watched him, not with the awe she once felt, but with something steadier. Respect. She understood now that Jack did not carry authority because he demanded it. He carried it because children trusted him to stay. Later that day, Sarah made a call she had postponed for years. She contacted the medical board overseeing her daughter's care and requested a complete revision of their treatment plan. Not an expansion, a simplification. Fewer machines, fewer specialists rotating in and out. More time, more consistency. The doctor on the other end of the line hesitated, surprised by the shift. Sarah did not argue. She spoke calmly, firmly, with the confidence of someone who had finally learned what mattered. As days turned into weeks, the changes deepened. Emma began to respond to voices she recognized. Lily practiced sounds in quiet bursts, her determination unmistakable. Mia watched them closely, absorbing their progress as if it belonged to her too. When she attempted a sound of her own rough and broken, Sarah celebrated it with the same reverence she would have given a first word. No one rushed. No one demanded more. The house itself transformed. It no longer echoed. It hummed softly with life. Nurses moved differently, less like operators, more like companions. Meals were eaten together when possible. Jack cooked simple dinners in the shared kitchen of the East Wing meals, shaped by necessity rather than luxury. Sarah joined them, often sitting at the table, listening more than she spoke. She learned the rhythms of Jack's life, the sacrifices he never named, the nights spent awake beside Mia's bed, whispering reassurances into the dark. One evening, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Sarah found herself standing alone in the main hallway, looking at the portraits lining the walls. Generations of Whitmores stared back, faces polished and distant. For years, she had believed strength meant carrying the family legacy forward without faltering. Now she understood something her ancestors never had. Strength could also mean letting others in. She returned to the care room where Jack sat reading to the children. When he finished, Emma released a sound that hovered between breath and intention. Jack did not react immediately. He waited, giving her space. Lily followed, shaping a similar sound. Mia laughed, softly delighted. Sarah covered her mouth, tears streaming freely. This was not a miracle that arrived all at once. It was a slow awakening earned through patience and presence. That night, after the children slept, Sarah sat beside Jack in the quiet kitchen. She told him she was afraid not of losing control, but of losing time. Jack listened, his expression thoughtful. He told her that fear never truly disappeared. It simply changed shape. What mattered was what you chose to do while carrying it. Sarah nodded, understanding that this was the kind of wisdom no amount of money could purchase. Months later, when Emma formed her first clear word, it was not Daddy or Mommy. It was Mia. The sound was imperfect, but unmistakable. Lily followed days later, echoing her sister. Sarah wept openly, holding both girls as Jack steadied Mia beside them. In that moment, there was no hierarchy, no debt, no ownership. Only family assembled not by blood alone, but by devotion. The world beyond the estate remained unchanged. Business continued. Wealth accumulated. Titles remained intact. But inside the house, a different currency ruled. Time given freely. Love offered without condition. Presence sustained through exhaustion. Sarah Whitmore, once defined by control, had learned to stay. Jack Miller, once overlooked, had revealed a strength that could not be dismissed. And 3 children who had lived in silence were finding their way towards sound, carried by a family that refused to let go. Sometimes love arrives quietly, wearing no title, asking for nothing. Sometimes it changes everything. Stories like this remind us of a truth that science often struggles to measure. Healing is not always a breakthrough, a device, or a diagnosis. From a professional perspective, especially in child development and trauma recovery, the most powerful catalyst is consistent emotional safety. When a child feels seen, heard, and protected without pressure, the brain slowly learns that it is safe to respond. What Jack offered was not treatment. It was presence. And what Sarah learned was not weakness, but courage. If this story moved you, take a moment to like the video. It helps stories like this reach people who may need hope more than answers. Subscribe to the channel if you believe that quiet acts of love can change lives in ways no title ever could. And now, I want to hear from you. In the comments, share this phrase if it resonated with you. Never give up.